I thought escape meant freedom, but when they surrounded me in the forest, I realized that the real fight was just beginning. 8 criminals, convinced of their impunity, grabbed me. They didn't know that I was a former Special Forces operative and that this game would change everything. Now they were the prey, and I was the hunter. Freedom doesn't come easy, especially when you're surrounded by injustice, prejudice, and the shadow of a past that won't let you go. I ran, feeling every step pierce my ribs, pain from old injuries, from falls, from blows that had never healed. My breathing was ragged and loud, my pulse pounding in my head like a drum. The forest around me seemed both a refuge and a trap. The trees stretched upward, thickly covering the sky and creating darkness where any noise could mean my death. I could feel them, 8 men following me. They thought I was just another victim, that they could use me as a cover, as a key that would open the way to freedom. They were wrong. The first movement was imperceptible, a shadow that quickly appeared between the trees. My heart sank, but I didn't stop. Years of training in the Special Forces had taught me to be quick and think faster. I knew that every second could be my last. When he lunged at me, I took the blow, not as a victim, but as a fighter. I staggered to the side, dropped to my knees, and with a sharp movement of my elbow, I hit him in the ribs. He clenched his teeth and fell to the ground, clutching his sides. The others rushed at me at once. They weren't a trained team, more like a mob, broken by fate, trying to grab what could save them from going back to prison. They had sticks, knives, heavy chains in their hands. They moved chaotically, but with desperation and criminal fervor. I dodged their blows, controlled my breathing, and counted their steps and movements. Their eyes glowed with hatred, but it was a hatred without purpose, more like fear. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I felt the strength gradually returning to my hands. I delivered a series of blows, each one precise and hard. They didn't expect me to fight like this, as if every blow were a matter of life and death. "Where are you going?" I shouted, grabbing one of them by the collar and staring into his frightened eyes. "Tell me where." He hesitated for a moment but said nothing. The bonds between them began to crack. They weren't sure of their leaders and didn't trust each other. Their plans were as shaky as they were. My attacker's expression changed. Fear, panic, hopelessness. That was exactly what I wanted to see. I knew that if I made them argue, they would ruin their chances. Suddenly, a shot rang out. The forest exploded with noise. It was the signal. The fear in their eyes grew. They began to move chaotically, looking for ways to escape. I seized the moment and sprinted forward, breaking away from my pursuers. My heavy legs pounded the ground, gasping for air. I knew this was only the beginning. Their mistake was underestimating me, but I knew my own strength. This fight was my challenge and my mission. Their fear, their panic, these were their weakest points. And I would use them to survive, to stop them. I was not just a victim, I had become the hunter. They thought their strength lay in their numbers and their cruelty. 8 men who had escaped from prison, united by a common goal to escape the law, their past, and the justice that was catching up with them. But I knew their unity was temporary, and fear and mistrust were eating away at them from within. When we found ourselves in an abandoned hut, far from the noise of the roads, I noticed how their expressions began to change. The leader, Victor, was increasingly losing control. He gathered them around him, trying to maintain order, but voices of doubt and fear broke through his commands. "We can't trust her," said Jake, young and nervous. "She could turn us into anyone." "You're talking nonsense," Victor replied coldly. "She's our chance to get past the checkpoints." "But what if it's a trap?" Michael's voice was low and threatening. "We'd be better off getting rid of her now." They argued, and every word shattered the fragile brotherhood that held them together. They saw me as a weakness, but they didn't know that I was listening to every word, gathering every nuance. I wasn't going to let them decide my fate. I knew that my strength lay in understanding their weaknesses. Their fear, their discord, that was my battlefield. Panic broke out when someone reported that the police were approaching. Victor shouted orders, but chaos had already taken over. They rushed in different directions, trying to find a way to escape. When one of them, big and scary, tried to grab me, I was ready. I felt the handcuffs on my wrists, but my training told me there was a weak spot. My movement was precise and quick, and the handcuffs began to loosen. The wind played with the leaves, and the forest once again became an arena of combat. I could feel them losing control, their strength and belief in victory fading away. Suddenly, there was a shot. One of them was trying to stop me from escaping. The bullet hit a tree nearby, and I felt my heart flutter with danger once again. Try not to die. I heard a voice filled with irritation. It was Victor, and I knew that if they caught me, I would face not only imprisonment, but something worse. But I wasn't going to give up. My struggle wasn't just physical strength, it was also strategy, endurance, and belief in justice. I saw their differences, and that gave me an advantage. I wasn't just a victim, I was a hunter, ready to do anything to survive. Panic grew among them, and they no longer knew who to trust. I was a shadow that made them make mistakes. With this knowledge, I prepared for the next step. My time had not passed, and I was ready to exploit their every fear. The darkness around the hut became heavy, as if the night itself wanted to break me. Victor and his team thought they could deal with me like a normal victim. But I wasn't like that. Every step they took, every whisper became information that I gathered like pieces of a puzzle. They didn't realize that I had long since stopped being afraid. Fear was their ally, but I had learned to control it. I saw how their nerves were eating them up inside, how they began to suspect each other, how their unity was crumbling. After every conflict, every argument, I felt myself growing stronger. Victor shouted orders, but his voice sounded more and more foreign to me. His authority was fading, leaving only irritation and fear. Once, when we were deep in the forest, they split up. Victor and 3 men went one way, the rest went the other. I knew this was their biggest mistake. I was left alone with 3 of them, Jake, Michael, and Steve. They looked at me differently, fear, hatred, doubt. And I used that moment. Do you know what trust means? I asked, looking them in the eyes. You don't have it. You're afraid of each other. They were silent, but my words sank deep. Each of them could see that this group was hanging by a thread. I played on their weaknesses, sowed distrust, and fueled internal conflicts. Their fear turned into chaos. Victor, far away in another part of the forest, was confused. His leadership was wavering, and it didn't go unnoticed. Suddenly, I heard a scream. One of them had succumbed to panic and taken a careless step. I seized the moment, lunged forward, grabbed a knife that was lying nearby, and held it so that everyone could see. I was ready to fight. I'm not afraid of you, I said quietly but firmly. Their expressions changed. Some began to retreat. Others raised their hands hesitantly. That moment was a turning point. I was no longer a victim. I was in control. Meanwhile, internal strife broke out in Victor's camp. He tried to maintain control, but his voice no longer sounded so convincing. Distrust permeated their every move. I knew that soon they would be forced to unite or be destroyed once and for all. I was preparing for the next step. Time was not on their side, but on mine. They thought they would escape. But I knew they would escape the law, but not me. The darkness around the hut became heavy, as if the night itself wanted to break me. Victor and his team thought they could deal with me like a normal victim. But I was not like that. Every step they took, every whisper became information that I gathered like pieces of a puzzle. They didn't realize that I had long since stopped being afraid. Fear was their ally, but I had learned to control it. I saw how their nerves were eating them up inside, how they began to suspect each other, how their unity was crumbling. After every conflict, every argument, I felt myself growing stronger. Victor shouted orders, but his voice sounded more and more foreign to me. His authority was fading, leaving only irritation and fear. Once, when we were deep in the forest, they split up. Victor and 3 men went one way, the rest went the other. I knew this was their biggest mistake. I was left alone with 3 of them, Jake, Michael, and Steve. They looked at me differently, with fear, hatred, and doubt. And I took advantage of that moment. Do you know what trust means? I asked, looking them in the eyes. You don't have it. You're afraid of each other. They were silent, but my words cut deep. Each of them could see that this group was hanging by a thread. I played on their weaknesses, sowed distrust, and fueled internal conflicts. Their fear turned into chaos. Victor, far away in another part of the forest, was confused. His leadership was wavering, and it didn't go unnoticed. Suddenly, I heard a scream. One of them had panicked and taken a careless step. I seized the moment, lunged forward, grabbed a knife lying nearby, and held it so that everyone could see. I was ready to fight. I'm not afraid of you, I said quietly but firmly. Their expressions changed. Some began to retreat. Others raised their hands hesitantly. That moment was a turning point. I was no longer a victim, I was in control. Meanwhile, internal strife broke out in Victor's camp. He tried to maintain control, but his voice no longer sounded so convincing. Distrust permeated their every move. I knew that soon they would be forced to unite or be destroyed once and for all. I was preparing for the next step. Time was not on their side, but on mine. They thought they would escape. But I knew they would escape the law, but not me. Light pierced the darkness as the operation began. All this time, I kept myself under control, keeping every move under control, because I knew there was no room for error now. 8 men who had been running from the law for so long were now trapped in a trap that I and my team had carefully planned. I had seen their fears before, their weakness, which broke through in conflicts and suspicions. But I also saw how far their desperation had gone. They didn't run because they wanted to live, they ran because they were afraid of dying behind bars. Their misfortune lay in the loss of their humanity, in the loss of faith in themselves and in others. We moved quickly and without emotion, because we knew that not only their lives were at stake, but also people's faith in justice. When the forest shook again with the sound of cars and police footsteps, I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept it to myself. Everything depended on how quickly we could reach them without letting them escape into the shadows. One by one, they began to be detained. Victor, their leader, tried to resist, but I saw defeat in his eyes. He understood that his game was over. When I stood in front of him, he didn't look like an enemy, but like a man broken by circumstances and his own mistakes. "Why did you do this?" he asked quietly, almost without strength. "Because you thought you were stronger than the system," I replied. But real strength lies in choosing to fight the right way. They thought the law was punishment, but it's a chance. A chance to correct their mistakes, a chance at a real life. I watched as they were put into the police vans, and I felt not the joy of victory, but a deep sense of responsibility. These men are part of a larger system that often overlooks those looking for a way back. I knew that each of them could change if someone gave them a chance. But right now, I was doing what I had to do, stopping them from escaping to prevent new crimes. My work did not end with the arrests. It was only the first page of a new story that we must write together, a story of justice, respect, and opportunity. When everything calmed down and I was alone again, I felt at peace. Not the peace of a winner, but the peace of someone who had done their duty. Justice had prevailed not through force, but through determination and faith. And even though new challenges might arise tomorrow, I was ready to fight for them. Because every victory is a step towards a better world. After the last ties between the fugitives were severed and they were put behind bars, I returned to the city. But peace? Forget it. It turned out to be just an illusion, like a shadow following me everywhere I went. Every day, I felt that this battle was only part of a larger war, a war for justice that was not visible in the headlines but permeated the lives of every person in this society. I saw inequality lurking in everyday life, in the looks I got, in the words that hid more than just prejudice. This story is not about criminals and law enforcement. It is about how the system that is supposed to protect people often pushes them to the brink of survival, creating new wounds and new stories of injustice. I saw the same eyes before me, the eyes of people who, like me back then in the forest, were fighting for the right to be heard and protected. For many, their struggle is not something abstract, but a daily reality. This world was not perfect, and it often forced them to endure injustice. They feared a system that often became their enemy instead of their support. When I was working on the fugitives case, I felt that we were all part of one big puzzle. A puzzle where each piece is a story of struggle, pain, and hope. And every step I took, every decision I made, was a step toward understanding that justice is not just punishment, but a chance for rebirth. After the operation was over, I started working closely with community organizations that help people who've been hurt by systemic discrimination. Because the truth was that criminal stories were just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath were the lives of millions of people who struggle every day with stereotypes, injustice, and inequality. My encounters with these people made me look at justice differently. It wasn't just about justice, but about support, about giving people a chance to change their lives. Support that they often lacked. They didn't want to be criminals or victims. They wanted to be heard, understood, and given a chance to start over. I felt responsible not only for the 8 people we caught, but also for those who were overlooked, those who live on the margins and whose struggles often go unnoticed. Because if not us, then who? If not now, then when? Alongside my work, I started speaking on public platforms, telling stories that make people think about discrimination, about justice, about how often people judge each other based on their appearance or past, without giving them a chance to change. It wasn't easy. Many people didn't want to listen. Some responded with contempt or aggression. But amid all the commotion, I found those who understood, those who also believed that change was possible. Every conversation, every story I heard from others gave me strength. I knew that my mission was not just to catch criminals, but to build bridges between the law and people who believe in second chances. The world was not perfect, and the struggle did not end when we put the fugitives in prison. It continued every day, in every battle for justice fought by people who never give up. I remembered that night in the forest when I had to fight for my life. That night when I realized that true strength does not lie in physical superiority, but in endurance, understanding, and faith. Now I was on the other side, not just as a hunter of criminals, but as the voice of those who want justice but are afraid to demand it. I knew that justice is not revenge. It is a chance for everyone to start over, a chance for a life without fear and pain. And I was ready to fight, not only for justice, but also for understanding, for support, for a world where everyone has the right to dignity. This was my new fight, and I wasn't going to give up. After I returned to the city, the air seemed thicker, as if every breath carried the weight of a responsibility I couldn't shake. The justice I was fighting for wasn't just a word in a textbook, but a real, living battle that continued every day. My thoughts often returned to the night when it all began. Those men who were running from the law thought they could escape us in their own past. But I knew you can't run away from yourself. Each of them carried a shadow that forced them to choose between salvation and ruin. The sense of progress in my work was intertwined with the realization that this was only the beginning of a long road. In the city, I met people who faced prejudice, indifference, and inequality every day, which had permeated all areas of life. They were not criminals, but often victims of a system that did not protect them as it should have. I started attending community meetings and supporting initiatives that fought for equal rights. A new understanding was dawning in my soul that the fight for justice was not only in the courts, but also in the hearts and minds of people. One evening, I was sitting in a cafe with one of the leaders of such an initiative, Kira. She talked about how important it is to teach society to see beyond the facade, to understand people's stories, their pain, and their hopes. Your story, she told me, is not just a case against criminals. It is a wake-up call for all of us to see where we have gone wrong. Those words echoed in my head day and night. I knew I wanted and needed to do more than just catch those who broke the law. I had to be part of the change, to build a bridge between the world that punishes and the world that supports. My work on criminal cases opened my eyes to how closely the misfortunes of individuals and the system are intertwined. It was like looking in a mirror and seeing not only myself, but also all those who still need help. After a night spent in stress and fighting for my life, I learned to appreciate moments of peace. But that peace was never long-lasting. The system that allowed these men to escape needed reform, and I decided to take action. I started working with local politicians, lawyers, and activists to build a network that could influence change. It was difficult, sometimes exhausting, but every step gave me hope. I remember meeting a young man at a meeting one day who told me that his family had faced injustice due to racial prejudice in the police. His story was further proof to me that justice is not just a word, but a lifelong commitment. I became part of his fight, helping him find his voice and the strength to stand up for himself and his family. Every day, I reminded myself that justice isn't just about arrests and convictions. It's about working with hearts, with communities that want change. At the same time, I didn't forget about those I had caught. I often thought about Victor and his team. They weren't just criminals. They were people who had broken under the pressure of life, chosen the wrong path, but still had a chance to redeem themselves. And although my job was to ensure the safety of society, I believed that every person deserves a chance to change. One day, I received a letter from one of those I had arrested. He wrote about how my intervention had changed his views, how he wanted to start over, how he planned to undergo rehabilitation. It was the best gift I could have received. I realized that the real victory was not that I had put them in prison, but that I had been able to open the door to a new life for them. This echo of my struggle, which resonated in many lives, reminded me that we are all human beings, with our fears and hopes. And as I stood at the crossroads of my life, looking to the future, I knew that the fight for justice would never end, but that every day was an opportunity to make the world a little better. Because only through understanding, support, and faith in a better future can we build a world where justice is not just a word, but a reality for everyone.